and welcome. Well, every parent and caregiver wants to give their child the best chance at life. And a crucial ingredient in experiencing a joyful, happy life lies within the quality of our relationships, fueled with emotion. Now, many psychologists over time have mentioned the ability to manage our emotions in a healthy way will determine the quality of our life, much more fundamentally than our IQ. Now, this in particular is called our EQ, which is what we're here to discuss today. And to do this, we welcome our special guest, Stephanie Pinto, a certified emotional intelligence coach and trainer, co founder at EQ Culture, and emotional intelligence trainer for Zen Tea Lounge Foundation. Now, her passion is in helping parents and their children to have a more calm and connected life and better relationships with those around them. Thank you for joining us, Stephanie. How are you?
Good. I'm so good. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yes, and it's a great pleasure to have you here today and speak about this because we've not actually discussed this in the podcast before. And it's my understanding that the concept of why, I guess, emotional intelligence is so important in raising children. This may actually be a new concept to many parents. However, I believe it's one that's vitally important for children's development, and for them to have more control of their emotions. Do you think that? Oh, I'd love to know your thoughts.
Yeah, 1000%. But then I'm probably a little bit biased. But you know what? I guess with my own kids, I have seen a huge difference um, before I learned about emotional intelligence compared to after, when we started changing the culture in our family and what we spoke about, the language we use, the way we dealt with emotions and big emotions and challenging behaviors. So it not only brings down the kind of energy in the home and brings the calm back to the home and that dynamic, but it does reflect in all areas of relationships with our kids, in the classroom, in the playground, with friendships, and things like that. So it has a huge impact on our kids' well-being, but us as a family too.
And I guess the other thing is too, the world has changed, as we know, so much in the last 12, 18 months and is continuing to change at a rapid pace. And with the view, I guess, of wanting to give our children, I guess, the best opportunities to build a happy life for themselves, we do have to set them up for this, in particular in the workforce later on in life. And as we know, like many innovative businesses around the world now actually hire based on an applicant's level of EQ before their level of skill. We've all heard the phrase hire for attitude and train for skill. It's a phrase that we've heard so many times before. So of course, being offered a job in the future and these days is much more about this our ability to be able to be liked and to get along with others more so than our school. So I'd love to know from your perspective, how important do you think it is to train these skills early on in life?
Yeah, you know what? That's such a good question because it does start early in life. It does start here in the home. And I always say if we want to raise emotionally intelligent kids, we need to first become emotionally intelligent parents or adults. And we're not always that. I only discovered this stuff right at the start of my 30s. So it took me a long time. I had zero emotional intelligence as a kid, as a teenager, and into my 20s. And because of that, I wasn't the person or the child who was blowing up and having big emotions and hurting others or getting triggered. I went the other way and I shut down. So I would get overwhelmed. I had no communication, conflict resolution skills, no resilience. And I developed such a strong anxiety that I would literally, if I was in a sort of nerve-wracking or nervous situation, I would faint on the floor. That was my body's
Really? You'd faint?
reaction. I was a fainter, and it happened from in my school years through to my 20s. I was a speech pathologist before this for 10 years, and in job interviews and with clients, I just had zero emotional intelligence. So it impacted my ability in my work, my friendships, and when I would go out for dinners and things like that, I would get overwhelmed. So it does, I wish that there was a different, I suppose, a different time back when I was younger. Obviously, all parents do the best that they could, and I know my parents absolutely did, but they had no awareness of emotional intelligence, and the fact that I was not managing my emotions at all. I was squashing them down, and that just does not go well.
So that sort of goes into my next question then, are we born with EQ, or does it have to be taught? Or does it depend on the child then? Is it a case by case scenario?
Yeah. So if we think of IQ, the traditional intelligence, that is something that a lot of people and researchers see as sort of set at birth or genetic. But EQ is such a buildable and learnable set of skills. It is a set of skills. It's not just one skills. You're not emotionally intelligent or you aren't. So the way that I was trained under my accreditation is looking at or realizing that there are actually 26 individual competencies within emotional
Wow.
intelligence, and they can 100% be learned. So it's things like emotional self awareness, behavioral self control, managing behaviors and disruptive emotions, keeping those in check. It's communication, it's resilience, it's integrity, it's teamwork, it's building bonds, relationships, stress management. Like there are 26, so I'm not going to name them all, but you can see how sort of widespread and overarching this is. And
Wow.
yes, we need them in the workplace, and we need them. I always say a classroom is like a mini workplace. We we have to get along with others, and we can have a lot more opportunities and a lot sort of more, I guess, enjoy our time more when we do have emotional intelligence.
Mm. So would you say that a child's EQ starts with their relationship with their parents then?
Oh yes. Oh, that is, you've hit the nail on the head. So I suppose, something that I often talk about in my webinars and in my workshops and things is looking at how we were parented as in our childhood as kids, because we bring that into our parenting now. So I can see that I was shying away from big emotions and anger and conflict and all those things with my kids, which meant I had sort of, I suppose, softer boundaries with them because I didn't have that I didn't experience that growing up. So, and on the flip side, my husband is Portuguese, so he is like loud, says what he thinks, and doesn't bat an eyelid if there's a conflict or a confrontation. So, just knowing that yes, with us as parents, we are the leaders of our family. We really are. It doesn't mean that we control our kids, and we surely do not want to control their emotions or suppress them, but we need to, I guess we're the first point of contact for teaching our kids about their emotions and how emotions are neither good nor bad. They just are. They are very, very important and intelligent assessments of our interpersonal functioning. So we need to listen to them, and we can control them, the emotions, so that we don't damage relationships, and we can build resilience. So yes, it always starts with us.
Yes. Well, thank you for answering that in that way. And it is an important thing for us to understand. Now, I wanted to acknowledge that we had published your article titled How Teaching Our Kids Can Lead to Better Individual and Societal Outcomes. Now, for someone who hasn't read the article yet, can you please tell us what it's about and, of course, what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, so look, I think that title and what's in the article around helping to teach our kids EQ for two main reasons: for themselves as individuals, but also for the greater community and the greater society. We know from so much research now around emotional intelligence that when a child has some level of emotional intelligence skills, the outcomes for them later in life, if you fast forward 20 years to when they're in the workplace or in university, the outcomes are so much more beneficial for them in terms of the types of jobs that they can access, the income that they can receive, and also their general level of happiness and well-being, lower levels of stress. They're more resilient. They have better communication skills, which really help them in times of conflict and breakdowns and disagreements. And we can only see as well from the research that in terms of when a collective or um, a community raises their awareness and their ability to use emotional intelligence, that has such impacts as well on on a team in a workplace. So that is part of my work. I co-founded EQ Culture, and we train teams and organizations to have better emotional intelligence skills because of the impacts in productivity, the impacts on the bottom line, the lower levels of absenteeism and staff turnover. And so there's a whole host of really, really positive outcomes that the research is showing. And it's all underpinned by emotional intelligence.
Wow, it sounds on the outside in that with this that there could be a true paradigm and a pivotal shift, I guess,
Yes.
in everyone's consciousness overall, which is what we sort of need, because these days pretty much narcissism is celebrated and almost normalized in so many circumstances where, what from my understanding, which I'd love for you to explain actually, to us, what is emotional intelligence, just so we can understand that. Is it teaching empathy, or as you mentioned, there's 26 things. So
Yeah.
how would you define exactly what it is?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I actually wanted to that sparked something in me when you said it's almost like a paradigm shift, and it is because for a long time we have been told, or we have thought, that emotions are messy, they're fluffy, leave them at the door, they just get in the way, get on with your work, and so on. And we now actually know, and we can see through our own experience and through research, that emotions are actually highly intelligent assessments of our interpersonal functioning. And it has to do with us, but also those around us. It's not a sort of selfish quest, I suppose. And so that leads me into what is emotional intelligence, as you just asked. And I suppose the wordy definition that we go by is that emotional intelligence is your ability to be aware of your own emotions and those of others in the moment, and to be able to use that information to guide your actions, to adjust your behavior, to make good decisions, and just overall to be able to have deeper and closer relationships with those around you. So you can see from that, it is a very long definition, but
No,
you can see
it's
there's an
beautiful.
element of, yeah, you can see the element of knowing my own emotions, that self-awareness, knowing how I show up as a person, my habits, my patterns of behavior, but also other people's emotions, what they're going through, what's underneath the surface. I often talk about what's going on under the iceberg, particularly with parents, with their kids' big emotions. What is driving their big emotions right now? Why has my child had this big, challenging, why have they just snatched that off their brother? Why have they just said a defiant no? Why are they getting in trouble for the fifth time this week? And I keep telling them not to do that, and they're just doing it again. So there's such, it's so empowering to have that awareness of yourself and your emotions and your triggers, because we do get triggered often by our kids, but also so that we can know what's going on with our kids and help them manage their emotions. So they have some emotional regulation skills, coping skills, and tools and things like that. It does come from us. And that's why I guess I'm so passionate about it.
Which we can hear, which is very exciting as well. And it's lovely to be able to share your enthusiasm and your passion for this. Now, I understand there are four core areas that make up EQ. The first two areas relate to our awareness of our and other emotions, as you just mentioned. And the second area of EQ relates to how we manage emotions, both our own and others. So could you maybe just expand on the four core areas that make
Yeah,
up EQ?
definitely. So we kind of see EQ as having four quadrants, like you said. And the first, almost like EQ 101, it's self-awareness. You need to first start with how are my emotions showing up? What causes them? What are the triggers? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And just having that, we call it personal power. That's one of the competencies, which is your ability to feel like you have the power over your own decisions, your own life, which way you're headed, and that sort of journey. So first, we do start with self-awareness, knowing ourselves. And to be honest, that can be a little bit uncomfortable, because we realize then when we do some sort of inner work that we have blind spots. But that's in and of itself a really powerful exercise to go through and to do. And so the second part in that first pair is the awareness of others' emotions. So having empathy for others. A lot of people think emotional intelligence is empathy. It's actually, empathy is one of those 26 competencies. So we have to be aware of others, their emotions, have empathy for them and what they're going through, the situational awareness. So knowing what is going on around us and making adjustments on the fly, and anticipate, recognize, and meet other people's needs. So we can't just be sort of insular and have our own little, be in our own head. That doesn't, it doesn't serve anyone really. So they're the first two. And then the second area of EQ relates to how we manage emotions both in ourselves and how we manage our relationships with others, because you can't manage other people's emotions. But self-management is around having behavioral self-control, being resilient, which I hear so many parents, they'll come to me for support or for coaching. They'll say, I'm not resilient, or my kids are not resilient. So that's a huge part of self-management. Having the ability to manage stress, having integrity, and showing initiative as well. So managing your own emotions, and kind of knowing that we all have those weaknesses or those blind spots, and how can we manage or improve some of those areas. And then the last point is relationship management. So that's conflict resolution, communication skills, building trust and bonds with others, teamwork and collaboration. And I know some of those sound like adult sort of skills, but we can build those in kids, and our kids need them just at a different level, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
So, I mean, the big question is, how can we teach children emotional intelligence, especially, and then this is the tough question, I guess, but if a parent themselves haven't been taught that throughout their own life, if you could expand on that, that would be awesome.
Yes. Yeah. So you are right. It is that much harder for us as parents, I think, if we have not had some of this stuff taught to us or exposed to us or modeled to us when we were kids, because we are pretty much conditioned and programmed without knowing it, and not intentionally, but we bring our habits and our patterns of behavior and our beliefs into the current time when we're parenting our own kids. So we always need to start with ourselves. And like I said, if we want to raise emotionally intelligent kids, we need to first become emotionally intelligent adults.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at our own habits and our own emotions, and sort of shifting the lens, or like zooming in on what is really going on and how do we show up as a parent. So we need to, yes, start with us first, because we are always modeling to our kids, regardless of whether or not we realize it, the way we manage our own stress, the way we deal with when our kids have big emotions, the way we deal with, or don't, our triggers. So we are always modeling to our kids, and we need to be aware of that. We obviously need to teach our kids some of these really basic skills around how they can recognize their emotions, like physiologically recognizing in their body. I talk about the wriggly feeling, or the buzzy feeling, or the hot feeling, or some kids will say, it's like an explosion, which is anger. So recognizing it in their body, understanding where it's coming from. So I say to parents, talk to your kids about what it feels like, where that's coming from. Like, what's that cause and effect of, wow, buddy, you look really angry right now. Is that because she's taken the textures off you and you hadn't even had a chance to start drawing? So connecting that cause and effect of, I feel like this because that has happened.
Mm-hmm.
Then we want to obviously teach our kids how they could label their emotions, because a lot of kids have about 3 words in their emotional vocabulary: happy, sad, angry. But there's actually, there is so many more, hundreds of emotion words if we look in the dictionary. And I've created a lot of resources and posters and emotion wheels, which have beautiful colored resources with different emotion words to teach our kids words like disappointed, or frustrated, or overjoyed, or nervous, worried. That there are so many. And I think that's really important. If we can't, and if our kids can't label their emotions, how are they going to express that, and then find some ways to find some coping skills? So if we can teach our kids, obviously by modeling or using some resources, books are amazing as well. And helping our kids label emotions more specifically, using some of those more nuanced emotion words, and then modeling how they can express it to us in the right way at the right time to the right person, not just blowing up or kicking or throwing something across the room, and things like that. So helping our kids to express what they're feeling. And obviously us as parents, I have to kind of put a little note in here that we need to be okay, feel okay when our kids are having these big emotions. It doesn't mean that we don't care and we're a cold-hearted parent. No, it just means we don't need to get so triggered when our kids have these big emotions. They have a very underdeveloped brain. They have very little behavioral self-control, impulse control, empathy, all of those sort of skills. We need to be okay with when they have blow-ups, if they stuff up, if they make mistakes, and we will coach and guide them and help them through it rather than just punish them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think the last point is that we then want to be able to model and teach our kids some pretty, age appropriate coping strategies. When you're feeling like this way or that way, what's something you could do to help bring those big emotions back down? What would be helpful to calm down? What could I do? What could you do? So many things we can do as parents.
Hmm. And you've mentioned a few times about the condition that we have as adults from our own childhood, which lie in our conscious and subconscious mind. And of course, it's varying different levels of people having ability to understand what EQ is. Would you say it's possible for a parent that maybe wasn't taught EQ, starting with empathy, which is one of the 26 things that you mentioned earlier
Mm-hmm.
on. But that is a starting point that, okay, if a parent acknowledges, I wasn't taught EQ, and maybe my EQ level is quite low for these reasons, by no fault of my own, but that was just how I was parented and how, from a generational perspective, it was passed down from my parents and grandparents,
Yes.
etc. So we are just where we are. We acknowledge it and accept it, but we want to I guess sort of stop that, and wanting to sort of to pass this on to be able to ensure that our children do have a higher level of EQ. So the question is it possible for a parent to, as they're teaching their own children about EQ, that they can teach themselves as well, for them to be able to stop and say, okay, if my child is reacting this way to this scenario, it's because they've modeled that off me, and because they have seen that from me, which I have identified that I've seen that in my parents, and it sort of
Mm,
goes back as well. So
yeah.
can parents that don't have EQ learn themselves through the fact that they, like when they are teaching it to their children?
I think, you know what? I think our kids are our mirrors in a way. They will show us what we need to work on or where our growth areas are and where our weak spots are, maybe. So if we, if we're a parent who gets really triggered and blows up when our child is upset or crying or, whinging, quote unquote, whinging, and complaining and things, then that's a big, don't want to say a red flag, but that's like a, hey, listen up, look up. There's like ding, 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 warning bell here. Something we've got to work through something here because you're having a big emotional reaction. We call it being emotionally hijacked. um, and knowing when that happens, taking that time to look a little bit deeper underneath the surface of why is that coming up for me? Was I never allowed to get angry or shout at my parents? Was I never allowed to say no to my parents? We have a lot of those, we call them paradigms, and I often go through with parents what their paradigms are, what these sets of beliefs that they cling to are. I was never allowed to shout. I had a parent who I just finished up coaching, and she said I wasn't even allowed to look angry. If I had an angry look on my face, I'd be sent to my room to sort it out. So yeah, have that self-compassion and that empathy for yourself, that we many of us have not been taught these skills. We have not been taught that big emotions are okay. We've been taught that anger and frustration are bad. So just, yeah, have that empathy and understanding. And I would say take that time to look inward at, why is this coming up for me? Why am I having such a big reaction? Why does this feel not okay for me when my child does this or does that? And often it isn't. Kids are very rarely intentionally manipulating and doing things on purpose to get a rise out of us. They're adventuring and they're testing and they're pushing the boundaries, and that's what being a child is about. So Yeah, having that empathy for ourselves, knowing that it doesn't come naturally to us because we were likely conditioned for many, many years, and we don't need to, and we have the power not to pass that on if we do something about it.
Hmm. Look, I think any leadership role in life, be it in business, being at home, being a parent, any leadership role puts you under the microscope. And naturally, it's going to sort of bring out all of those things and amplify them in any way, shape, or form. So, of course, it's everybody's choice if they want to unpack what those things are, to do the shadow work, to be able to dig that up. And that those things can take years, of course. But at the moment, all we're talking about is ensuring that our children have a level of EQ. But I think, as mentioned, it does actually naturally bring up all of these things within ourselves as well. Um,
Mm.
Now, I understand that you see your children as being, I guess, the heart of the family, and that when, your belief is that when they have the right tools within themselves, that they can blossom into confident, resilient, and balanced adults, as you said earlier. And you mentioned also that as a child that you had zero emotional regulation skills, and you weren't resilient at all. So that you were unable to manage your own emotions. So I just wanted to know, just as a point of reference for any parent that's listening at the moment, as well. I mean, how did this impact your schooling as a child, and or your adult life at all? And if so, how? So we're given a point of reference as to somebody that acknowledged that they didn't have very high EQ skills. And on the flip side, I guess the positive and negatives of what side of the fence you sort of sit on. But how did that affect you when before you started to work on it?
Yeah, you know what? For me, as I said, I was the one who sort of shut down and went insular and went internal and suppressed and squashed. I became a very good people pleaser. So I would have no boundaries. I didn't want to say no. I didn't want to let people down. And I was very agreeable. And it meant that I was well liked. I had a good group of friends. I did relatively well at school. And the detrimental sort of I guess the flip side of that, or the disadvantage, is that I always put myself last. I took on way too much. I got overloaded. I got stressed. I couldn't cope with those big demands. Instead of blowing up, I shut down. And for parents these days, and me as well, for my kids, I think, well, when my kids are in their teenage years, I want them to come to me if something big happens. I want them to open up and talk. And I was one of the kids in their room who didn't talk, and came home from my part-time job in high school, and I went straight to my room. Those kind of things. I think, my goodness, I was lucky that I didn't get into like drugs or anything crazy like that, because I would have just agreed and said yes and okay, and my parents wouldn't have known. So um that's detrimental when we don't have those skills to communicate, to be open, to be confident, to be resilient. And yeah, even into my 20s, it affected me. I remember fainting in a job interview because I was so overloaded. I was so anxious, and I just didn't have any coping skills, no emotional regulation skills. And I remember also in one of my pracs at uni, going into one of the hospitals here in Sydney to do a prac in a stroke ward as a speech pathologist. And I took a few steps down the corridor on my first day and out on the floor, fainted, because I just thought, can't do it, too much overload. This is a threat. No, no, no. And I couldn't speak up. I couldn't say, hey, this is a bit too much. I'm a bit nervous. I squashed that down. I put a smile on my face. I was like, I can do this. Don't show any weakness. Um, don't show your emotions. And yeah, don't let anyone down, my big speech pathology supervisor. And so I fainted. And I remember coming to in one of those small little rooms on the ward where the family sit, and there's a couch and a TV. And there was about 6 people around me, and they said, we got the crash cart because we couldn't feel your pulse. And I was like, I'm just a fainter.
So,
So,
so
you know,
all in
it,
all, and I mean, so not having those skills did severely impact, I guess, your schooling, and
yeah,
even your career as a speech pathologist
yeah.
overall. So that really does highlight the importance of ensuring that, when kids have the ability to emotionally regulate, that they can work through those big emotions and identify what they are to be able to sort of regulate and put themselves into a better space. Would you say?
Yeah, you know what? Emotional intelligence is a protective factor. We talk about risk factors and protective factors. And we know from research, this protects our kids from going down the route of drugs and alcohol to manage big emotions and strong emotions in their teenage years. It protects them from stress, being able to manage stress because you're aware of your emotions when things are getting too much and you have coping strategies. And it builds resilience and confidence. So it's literally, you know, a non-negotiable trait that I think we should be teaching our kids. They should be teaching it in schools, not just kind of waiting to the workplace when they do some professional development and doing it then.
as well. And so I understand you used to be what you call a shouty parent, and that you felt that raising your voice at your kids was the only way to get through to them. But this all changed when you discovered these new tools and strategies that really help give you, I guess, your peaceful home back. And with this, it really helped you sort of crack that code. So, I mean, that really does, I guess, on all levels, provide a reason for all parents to be able to understand a little bit more. So, just in final, I mean, in summing this up, how would you summarize, I guess, the key messages for any parent that is now wanting to be able to establish and depend on where they are on a level of 1 to 10 with their EQ, but they just want to sort of strengthen and grow that in their household?
Yeah.
Where would they
You know what I
start?
think? Ah, gosh, you know what? I mean, the place I started was just reading online, watching YouTube videos. I know that sounds so simple, but delve into it. There's so much information and there's so much research now. I started reading a few books. I've got some of them behind me about emotional intelligence. There's one called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, who's kind of considered the father of emotional intelligence. And things like The Whole Brain Child by Dan Siegel. That's a beautiful book that teaches parents and educators around what's going on with our kids' brain and their emotions and their behavior. And so we know how to, why they're having these big emotions, why they're having those disruptive or challenging behaviors, and how we can click in, how we can use our communication skills and connect with them rather than just consequences and punishment that don't work, or they work in the short term, but it's kind of parenting or disciplining out of fear. So I would say, you know, get reading, get Googling, get learning. I've got a lot of blogs on my website and articles and things like that. Um, but just start, I suppose, with that notion and the truth that emotions are not messy, they're not fluffy, they're not to be swept under the rug. That is, at worst, it's dangerous and it's risky for your child to do that. And and just start opening up the conversations, start talking about your feelings, their feelings, what happened today at school, how'd that make you feel, what are you going to do, like how can we solve that problem, what would you do next time if that happened. So really simple conversations is a beautiful place to start.
Thank you for sharing that. Of course, if anyone's they have any questions and they would like to reach out to you, whereabouts can they find you?
Yeah, I would love anyone to reach out and connect. One of the easy places is my website, which is just stephaniepinto.com. Very simple. I'm on the social medias as well. I run a beautiful Facebook group called Let's Raise Emotionally Intelligent Kids. And I'd love anyone to come along, join the conversation. And I'm always posting tips, information, strategies, and articles and stuff there too.
Stephanie, thank you so much for your time today. We'll have all of those links in the show notes and, of course, link through to your website and socials so people can find you. Thank you so much for raising this very important topic and opening the conversation. And hopefully, we've planted some seeds in some people's minds as to, well, the reasons why they should be sort of hopefully, aiming to sort of have a more emotionally sort of open household and peaceful household overall. But thank you so much for your time and hope to have the opportunity to chat with you again in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, stay safe. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel.
Bye bye.